USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at USAA.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
This summer, try the new Strato Frappuccino blended beverage at Starbucks. It's the classic blended iced coffee you know and love, now topped with a creamy layer of handcrafted brown sugar cold foam. Available for a limited time. Your Strato Frappuccino is ready at Starbucks.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
At 3 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Dr. Sky Experience. As always, as you tell us, great guests from the realms of astronomy, space, aviation, weather, stories of American exceptionalism, and celebrity guests in the mix. As we welcome you, no matter what time it is for you, in the evening, in the morning, anywhere around the world, and I'm sure it's 5 o'clock somewhere as happy hour begins. But being more serious, as we continue to discuss here on Talk Radio 77 WABC, we love your commentary, and we certainly like to get those emails, and we appreciate it. Why? For many reasons, and one of them that is important, is that possible future guest that many of you out there might select and suggest for this particular show so that we can suggest that. It's simple, DRSKY at WABCRadio.com, and also, ladies and gentlemen, as if you didn't know by now, but maybe we have, and I'm sure we do have, many, many new listeners out there to listen to the entire podcast of the Dr. Sky Experience and all the other great talk show hosts here at Talk Radio 77 WABC. Simply make it WABCRadio.com and also RedAppleAudioNetworks.com. And let me thank both Bill and Tony. They're our helmsmen of this powerful Starship radio station that's beaming its signal out, as I proudly say each time, not only to the nation, around the world, but who knows, I'm sure, and pretty confident, way out to the universe. In our 2-hour show today, in hour number 1, we'll be talking with special guests. In just a moment, we'll be introducing Bill McKibben, a brand new book, and we'll ID him, Here Comes the Sun. He has some very important things to say about the environmental concerns about climate change that I think everybody within the sound of my voice and his would certainly like to hear to give you an opinion. And also joining us throughout this 1 hour would be a good friend of ours, radio talk show host Richard Dugan of Tell Me Your Story from a popular radio station in Southern California. He spent well over 25 years, as he continued to do in his par excellence, discussing interesting issues, that is, with very important guests, not only talking about science, the environment, and, of course, American exceptionalism himself. But let me do a brief analysis and ID of our first guest that we have here on the radio show this morning. We're going to be speaking with Bill McKibben. Who's he? An American environmentalist, author, and journalist who has written extensively on the impact of global warming. He's the Schumann Distinguished Scholar at Middlebury College in Vermont and leader of the climate campaign group called 350.org. He has authored a dozen books about the environment, including his first, The End of Nature in 1989, about the seriousness, in his opinion, of climate change. And Falter, Has the Human Game Begun to Play Itself Out, in 2019, about the state of environmental challenges facing humanity and future prospects. His brand new book, which interestingly enough, is just about coming out as we speak, and it is. It's Here Comes the Sun. He himself, author Bill McKibben. His subtitle, A Last Chance for the Climate and Fresh Chance for Civilization. Mr. McKibben, welcome. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us. How are you?
Doctor, what a pleasure to be with you. It's been a beautiful day up here in the mountains of the East, and it's a pleasure to join you at the end of it.
Well, thank you, sir. And let's also welcome talk show host Richard Dugan of Tell Me Your Story. Richard, good morning to you on the West Coast. Still early evening. How are you as you join us this morning and evening? And do we have Richard with us?
Well, you have Rod Pyle here. I think we might have gotten the hour mixed up.
Oh, I do apologize, Rod, and that's interesting, ladies and gentlemen. The studio will get Richard Dugan on the line, but we will be talking with you. It's so interesting, Rod. We'll be talking with you in the 10 o'clock hour. So while we go ahead and get Richard on the line, let's continue to discuss the importance of your brand new book, Here Comes the Sun. Bill McKibben, let's talk about a little bit about your background and how you got involved in the story. As you describe it, of the seriousness of what's happening in the climate world. And we want to be fair to everybody out there, because just a few weeks ago, we had Tom Harris, the executive director of the International Climate Change Organization, maybe taking a different stance on this. So describe your background. It's quite fascinating. I appreciate your time.
Sure. Actually, this book is much less about climate than it is about energy and about the remarkable thing that's been happening over the last 36 months or so around the world. And that's the incredibly rapid breakout of renewable energy, solar and wind. This energy transition is the fastest energy transition we've ever seen in history. It took us 60-some years from the invention of the first solar cell in New Jersey to 2022, when we got our first terawatt worth of solar panels installed on the planet. The second terawatt took 2 years. The third will happen in about 15 months and will be finished very soon. But the pace just keeps accelerating. By May of this year, which is the last month for which we have data, the Chinese were installing 3 gigawatts of solar panels a day. A gigawatt is the rough equivalent of a coal-fired power plant, a big one. So they were putting up a coal-fired power plant worth of solar panels every 8 hours. And, we can see it in our country, too. Texas is putting up renewable energy faster than any state in the union, surpassing California now. They're building not only lots of sun and wind power, but huge batteries on the grid to store this. So the basic, overwhelming, overarching point is that humans suddenly find themselves at a place where we could give up our 700,000-year-old habit of setting things on fire and rely, in fact, instead on the fact that our local star, the most charismatic object in our universe that already provides us with warmth and light and photosynthesis, is now happy to provide us with all the power we could ever use as well.
It's interesting that you bring up this, and if you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, Bill McKibben, his brand new book, Here Comes the Sun, A Last Chance for the Climate, and in his opinion, a fresh chance for civilization. And also joining us, now that we have our coordinates locked in, let's welcome Richard Dugan. Good morning, Richard. Thank you for joining us, and we do appreciate your time and contribution to the hour. How are you this morning? And do we have Richard? Well, let's continue. Go ahead, Richard. Are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm here. I'm very fascinated by this. Let me, Doctor, if I may ask you, Mr. Kibbe, how do you handle the criticism by those who think that, and I can only use these labels because it's the only way to describe it, the left wants to eliminate petroleum from our diet totally, completely, which I don't believe is true. But how do you handle the criticism by those people who criticize both solar and wind in terms of what it takes, the energy that it takes to manufacture the solar panels or the windmills, if you want to refer to those, the wind turbines, just to generate wind? And, of course, the wind isn't always blowing and the sun isn't always shining, et cetera, et cetera. I'd love to hear how you handle those kinds of things, because I'm in favor of what you're talking about 100%.
Yeah. So there's 2 very good questions, Richard. The first one is the amount of energy that it takes to produce this stuff. The payback time in energy terms now for producing a solar panel, because we've gotten so efficient at producing them, is a matter of months. They're up for a matter of months before they've repaid the energy that it took to build them. The same with wind turbines. And, of course, in China now, as China becomes not a petro-state, but the world's first electro-state, they're increasingly making solar panels with solar power. As to the question of, I think, what they'd call intermittency, the fact that the sun goes down or the wind sometimes drops, the answer to that is another technology that's been dropping in price just as fast as sun and wind, and that's batteries. California where you are over the last few years has installed brand new big batteries on the grid. And at night now in California, the biggest source of supply most evenings once the sun goes down are the batteries that have been soaking up excess sunshine all afternoon. The bottom line in California is that the state, which is, of course, the fourth largest economy in the world, is using 40% less natural gas to make electricity than they were
this is interesting.
2 years ago. 2 years
Well, gentlemen,
ago.
let me jump in here to take command here back, because I want to make sure the most important part of this radio show, and I'm sure both of you would agree, is those out there that are listening around the nation and the world. And always, ladies and gentlemen, we value your contribution in the form of what we like as one of the four types of conversation in dialogue. And to do that, you can get in on the line, and hopefully it'll be a quick line at 1-800-848-9222, 1-800-848-9222. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Bill McKibben. He has a brand new book, Here Comes the Sun, heavy emphasis on the necessity of solar power and maybe other alternative forms of energy. And Richard Dugan of Tell Me Your Story from California. And I apologize to the audience for the lack of the rapid response here as far as when we're hearing and talking. There could be some sort of a lag. But let me take charge over here again, gentlemen. Let me talk a little bit about the sun from the astrophysical and the astronomy world. And I think this is fascinating for people out there. And I'm not making this stuff up after years of study. If you were to look, ladies and gentlemen, at the diameter of the sun compared to the Earth, it would take 109 Earths to make the diameter of this great fusion ball, the sun. It's 865,000 miles across. More technically, it rotates in its equator about once every 25 days. And if you were unfortunately able to go to the surface of the sun, that temperature at the very top of this plasma ball is 12,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and an even more astronomical number, the core, some 30 million degrees Fahrenheit. Now, how about this, ladies and gentlemen, and our special guests? Every second, this is what makes me so fascinated about the conversation, the sun is transforming 600 million tons of hydrogen into 596 million tons of helium every second for the last 4.5 billion years. And folks, ladies and gentlemen out there in Radio Land and in the internet world, if we were looking at how fast this Earth is moving around that star, we're going 67,000 miles an hour around that bright object, which, believe it or not, the sun is a yellow dwarf. So isn't that interesting, Mr. McKibben? The power of the sun is just overwhelming. And continue on about your necessity for why we need to do this. And if I'm correct, wasn't it the University of Delaware that was back in the 70s, the first institution to utilize solar power? And describe to us when solar panels officially came in.
That was the first solar house in America. It was on the campus of the University of Delaware. And of course, in those days, solar panels were really expensive. What's happened now, and the reason that we're seeing this extraordinary acceleration in solar use of solar, is that engineers did their job steadily iterating new designs. Sometime about 4 or 5 years ago, we passed an invisible line where it became cheaper to produce energy from the sun and the wind than it did from burning coal or gas or oil. We now live on a planet where the cheapest way to make energy is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. And the people who seem to have realized that most fully are the Chinese, who are busily building out this technology and all the technologies that go with it. Because they have all of a sudden all this cheap electricity from the sun and the wind, they're also specializing in building both batteries and electric cars. We're used to thinking of Detroit as the source of automotive innovation, but really now some of the best and certainly the cheapest good cars on the planet are coming out of China, and they're beginning to dominate the market in the rest of the world. So
well, let me jump in on this. Let me jump in for a moment, because I'm interested in American abilities too. And can you give us some statistics that maybe there's a way, and I don't know this, that's why we have great guests like yourself and Richard to discuss these issues. Is there more now of an emphasis on United States manufacturing? And if you have statistics, give us the percentages of where it's coming from China and how it's coming from the U.S.? How can we build more in the United States, I'm saying?
Well, so the way I don't mean to get political here.
That's okay. I mean, nor do I, but I just want to see how America can lead the charge here.
Absolutely. Me too. Me too. As a patriot, let me say, it was during the Biden administration that they set aside lots of money to try and start catching up with China. And we began to build solar panel factories of our own. In fact, interestingly, the biggest one in the Western Hemisphere is in Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene's district in Georgia.
Interesting.
But now, unfortunately, the new administration has shut down most of that work. In fact, just yesterday, they announced that they were shutting down a 95% complete wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island because the president, as you know, doesn't like wind power because he thinks, I think, that it's ugly, and they don't like solar power, I think, because they're worried that it will compete with the fossil energy, which it will. There's no question.
Sure.
But that's the direction that the world is moving, and I worry very much that if we don't start catching up, 10 years from now, visitors will come to America just to sort of gawk at it will be kind of the colonial Williamsburg of internal combustion instead of the trendsetters here that we could be if we got to work on this stuff.
Well, Bill McKibben, do you have any statistics? I mean, ROI, let's say this, looking at solar power, because we're here in the desert Southwest, and many people may know I'm broadcasting from Phoenix in the desert Southwest, where solar power, obviously, with the percentage, the high percentile of days that are sunny, it seems to be a magnanimous thing. But if you're up in the north parts, let's say where you are, beautiful country, you may not have the amount of sunlight for the entire generation maxed out. So do you have any statistics about how wind power versus solar power?
I've had solar panels on my roof in Vermont for a quarter century, and they do a wonderful job. But, one of the things that's really great about this is that wind power, which of course is just another form of solar power, or the wind comes from the fact that the sun heats the earth differentially, producing those winds that turn the turbines.
You're right.
Wind power and solar power balance each other nicely. As you get further towards the north, you get more wind and less sun. And especially seasonally, in the winter when the sun is low at higher latitudes, wind speeds are higher. But the same thing is true even in the course of a day. So, Richard, in California, you know that as the sun goes down, that's the moment when the onshore breezes begin to pick up, usually in the evening. So these things balance each other extraordinarily well, and the point is that there's so much excess. The amount of energy that the sun beams at the earth every day is thousands of times more energy than we use. So we don't need to cover the planet with solar panels to take advantage of it. We need to, use 1 or 2% of our land area. But that's because it's a good crop, just like anything else that we, use our land to produce.
Well, let's go to Richard Dugan and tell me your story. Richard, from your analysis there in the Santa Barbara area, a beautiful place that many people, I'm sure, would love to visit. We envy you in so many ways when you see that beautiful ocean. But do you see a percentage, a high amount of wind power, or do you even have any comment on this versus solar power? Is there a lot of wind power generation in your area? Do you know of?
Well, I will say that I'll put it in this context. First of all, yes. That there is a good breeze. There's an area west of us called Lompoc, where they say most people who live there say that the wind is blowing there all the time, which I would not be a fan of from the standpoint of living there. But then we also have our electric company that likes to turn the power off when the winds kick up just a little bit. Here in the summer, we went through both June and here we are in August and having those kinds of situations. But yes, there are areas, for example, in California out by Palm Springs. As you're coming across the 10, you see that wind farm. They didn't put those there because they looked pretty. They put them there because the wind is blowing most of the time. And I have to tell you, Mr. Kibbe, my biggest problem with the critics is the whining and the complaining about whatever it is that they come up with, instead of putting that energy into, let's fix the problem. Let's deal with the challenges that we have instead of whining and complaining about it. Come on, let's move on.
No, you bring up a good point, Richard, but Mr. McKibben, this is interesting. I want to zoom in a little more because we have a limited amount of time, but ladies and gentlemen of the listening audience, far and wide around the world, and who knows, maybe out in the cosmos, even all the way out to the Milky Way, yes, being serious, I'm concerned, ladies and gentlemen, what's your opinion of the necessity, or as our special guests are talking about here, more so Bill McKibben with his brand new book, Here Comes the Sun, is there really another alternative? Now, we could go on forever on this subject. Some have talked about the nuclear option as far as generation of power. Some have detested that. And there's many controversies and also pluses for people out there. I'm sure your choice, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to hear from you. 1-800-848-9222 to start a conversation in the form of a dialogue. But let's go through your book, Mr. McKibben, because we obviously have a short amount of time. I mean, the premise here, we simply get it. Here comes the sun, the necessity for this. But do you talk about ways in the book, without having, people not get the book, that we can actually, move more toward what you're saying as a solution to many of our energy needs? Describe that.
So here's one of the we can be doing. It costs 3 or 4 times as much to put solar power on your roof in the U.S. as it does in Australia or the EU. It's not because the panels are more expensive. It's because we have a Byzantine and Baroque system of permitting. There's 15,000 municipalities in this country, each with its own building code. They send up inspector after inspector, on and on and on. Happily, there are some loose solutions to that. There's from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, there's a thing called Solar App Plus that's now been mandated in California, Maryland, and New Jersey that allows for essentially instant permitting for contractors once they're up on your roof looking at your setup. An even better example, and I think one that'll really appeal to you, in Europe over the last 3 years, millions and millions of apartment dwellers who don't have their own roofs have turned to what's called balcony solar. You go to the Best Buy and get a solar panel designed to hang over the railing on your balcony. You plug it directly into the wall, and in many cases it's producing a quarter of the power that people use. That's illegal in this country, except in the state of Utah, where the state legislature earlier this year unanimously passed legislation after a libertarian state senator said, why should people in Frankfurt and Stuttgart have this opportunity and not people in Provo and Salt Lake City? And so now if you go on YouTube, you'll get lots of videos of people, Utahns, putting up their balcony solar and turning on the sun, as it were. So this is not an ideological divide. People across the political spectrum really like the idea of being able to be their own power supplier, in many cases, to not have to depend on utilities.
Yeah, you bring up something interesting here, sir, you bring up something very interesting, because everyone who's listening to this program, if you have an electric bill, you're seeing, in many cases, an extraordinary increase in those rates in the kilowatt-hour charges. And if you can lessen that, we had a home in which we did have, Mr. McKibben, a solar system, but we purchased it. So the reality of the situation was it wasn't that you were making monthly payments on it, and it actually came out years ago to be a very cost-effective solution. Again, kudos to what you're saying. But again, with people looking at these electric bills, look at how hot it has been right here in the Northern Hemisphere and in other parts of the country. All other solutions, and you just brought one to the table, you could look, if you're an apartment dweller, and do something about hopefully lessening the power that you have to pay from the electric company. And obviously, what do we do about that? And we stand still. We're going to just have to pay more for the electric. Here's a solution you're bringing to the table. And I appreciate that.
It's exactly right. It's an exciting time. We're in our mind, we file this stuff under the label of alt alternative energy. But that's not the case anymore. 95% of new electric generation around the world last year came from the sun and the wind. So in our minds, we think of this stuff still as the kind of whole foods of energy, nice but pricey. It's actually the Costco of energy. It's cheap, it's available in bulk, it's on the shelf ready to go.
No, I appreciate that. And, we'll get back with Richard Dugan of Tell Me Your Story in the next 30 minutes as we continue here just before the bottom of the hour with the hard break just around the corner. But it is interesting. So describe to us, this book is available. It just came out, if I'm correct, reading August the 19th, which is just days ago. And as always, books are available wherever good books are sold, right, Mr. McKibben?
Yeah, absolutely. It should be in every bookstore by now. It's selling well, maybe because I stole the title from George Harrison of the Beatles, and it turns out that that's the most popular Beatles song there is streaming online. So Here Comes the Sun is a kind of joyful message for a lot of people.
Before we go to the bottom of the hour show, our guests are certainly there, and they have their own status. But 1-800-848-9222, the question I pose to you is, do you, ladies and gentlemen, feel that solar and wind power is a viable solution to your energy requirements? And maybe you don't know a whole lot about it, but you probably have so many questions about this. Joining us for hour number one, our very special guest, Bill McKibben. His book, Here Comes the Sun, A Last Chance for the Climate and a Fresh Chance for Civilization. And also in the background, shadowing us, Richard Dugan, out in Santa Barbara, California, where it's still a beautiful Saturday evening, here on this show, talking about his program and many alternative energy sources in the story of Tell Me Your Story. We'll be right back on the Dr. Sky Experience, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate you as we move deeper into your weekend and as the Earth spins around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour. We'll be right back.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
I have no doubt that we will be successful in harnessing the sun's energy. If sunbeams were weapons of war, we would have had solar energy centuries ago. An interesting quote from the unknown, but we'd surely like to find out who really did say that. At 33 minutes after the hour, as we move to the conclusion of hour number one, still time, ladies and gentlemen, to get in with your concerns, conversation. It could be a detailed question about how, if for, let's say, a certain square footage of a home, how do we develop a strategy for making sure that we have the right amount of solar in that particular home? Joining us for this hour is Bill McKibben. His new book, Here Comes the Sun, and also Richard Dugan, a radio talk show host in Southern California of Tell Me Your Story. Mr. McKibben, can you talk about this? I'm interested to know this, and maybe it's an unfair question, but does the government have a specific plan to help people to get into solar? I mean, is there some sort of a benefit that the government gives you in the form of rebates and tax benefits? I mean, I'd like to learn a little bit more if you do know that.
Yes. Well, there was. The Biden administration had this large bill they called the Inflation Reduction Act that had money for precisely this purpose. It's now been repealed by the Republican Congress, but that repeal doesn't take effect immediately. If you want to put solar panels on your house, you can get a 30% tax credit through midnight on New Year's Eve. If you want to buy an electric vehicle, you need to move more quickly. That tax credit now expires at the end of September. These things were supposed to last for a decade to give us this transition into this new energy world and to help compete with the Chinese, but they've now been taken away. And so you really do want to move quickly in the next period of time, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's go to Richard Dugan. I got a question for you, and I've asked this many times when we've spoken, in the very distant past. Can you tell us, according to so many out there, and I don't have the information in front of me, the concerns about wind power, there was an endangerment to birds, and also somehow affecting the migration of whales in the ocean when these big wind farms were put off the coast? And any information you can share from California that you've been studying?
Well, from what I have heard in that regard, specifically to birds, that was an inflated number. There were not as many birds being, quote unquote, killed by these wind turbines as was being stated. Any time an animal is injured or killed through man's innovation, we'll call it, it's sad. But the numbers were overly inflated. And as far as the issue with the whales, I'm going to say that when you start, because I was also thinking too, because there's been a lot of controversy over that because of how it would look. Well, it's going to be so far offshore, no one's going to be able to see them anyway.
Okay.
I also thought about wave power as well. I've been hearing about and reading about that aspect as well. But anytime you start to send electricity, or you start to send those kinds of waves, even though they might be self-contained in the wires or the optics or however you're sending it, you're going to have an impact on the natural world. That is just one of the, you might say, side effects of this process. Because we have the same situation here. I mean, when with the wires overhead, we have the electric company saying, "Hey, right. We're turning your power off because the winds are kicking up. It's a heat advisory, high fire danger, et cetera, et cetera." Matter of fact, this morning we had 3 small fires, only a quarter of an acre, but we had 3 small fires to the north of us. We don't know how they started, but nonetheless, that is part of. That's part of, I don't want to say the dilemma, but part of the challenge. How do we generate what we need as human beings without destroying the natural world? That's the question.
I agree with you, but let me ask this to both of you, gentlemen. This is interesting, and I would hope that people would want to jump in at 1-800-848-9222. Of course, our pleasure to listen to your dialogue in the form of conversation. But here's something very interesting that I'd like to look at. You, as Richard Dugan in California, you tell me all the time that your power goes out a lot. And here's the thing. Mr. McKibben, does that occur back in the New England area often? It seems more in California. So wouldn't that be a necessity to store power from the sun? That would be a simple case, right, gentlemen? Wouldn't that be a classic example if the power grid is going down all the time?
Yes, I'll let McKibben answer first.
Go ahead.
The head of the Energy Reliability Council of Texas, which is what they call the utility regulator in Texas, said earlier this summer that Texas, which has had big problems with blackouts, should not have them this summer or going forward because they now have so much renewable energy and the batteries that go with it that the grid is far more stable than it's been before. Because this is the cheapest and quickest way to build power, it allows us to stabilize these grids. And on the really important point that you raise about effects on the natural world, we're actually getting lots of good news on this front. So, as Richard points out correctly, the numbers about bird deaths and things were inflated, and they're getting much lower all the time because we're building ever bigger wind turbines that turn more slowly. And, birds are reasonably skillful aviators. They can avoid these things. What's happening in the ocean, in Europe, we've built an awful lot of big wind farms offshore. And what they've been finding in the last little while is that they're becoming huge artificial reefs, the bases of them, and lots of fish spawning now in those artificial reefs. They've been beneficial in the same way that we're now finding that solar farms, because they produce shade and retain more moisture,
right,
the perfect environment for growing lots of crops in between the rows. I was just looking at a study today from France showing that wine grape yields were increasing 60% when you were growing the vines in and among the solar panels because there was that shade there for them.
Yes. Very interesting. Let me get a little touchy subject going here, and this is always done with respect here, and I always would have nothing but that. But here we go. Can you, Mr. McKibben, give me a definition better, and take your time if you need to go through this a little bit. I mean, this is not an attack on you or your credibility at all, but can you give me a definitive distinction between climate change and global warming? And I ask this of so many people on both sides of the political spectrum, and we're not trying to be political. What would you say to that question? That's an interesting one, I think.
global warming is just what happens when you burn fossil fuel. As you know, you produce carbon dioxide. It's an inevitable byproduct of fossil fuel combustion. And as a result, the molecular structure of that CO2 traps heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. We've known about this for a long time, and it's the curve of increasing temperature across the planet is doing just what scientists said it would do. The temperature goes up, and then as it goes up, we see lots of other really fascinating physical phenomena starting to follow. So, for instance, one of the things that's clearly happening on our planet now is that the jet stream gets stuck in strange high-amplitude patterns. And the reason is that, as you know, the jet stream's driven by the difference in temperature between the equator and the poles.
Correct.
And as we're melting ice at the poles, that's reducing that temperature differential. By the same token, the Gulf Stream, which is 100 times the volume of the Amazon River, works because of the salinity differences, the density differences in seawater. As we're melting all that ice up in the Arctic and pouring lots of fresh water in, the salinity differences are diminishing, and as a result, the Gulf Stream is beginning to flicker and falter. So we're now at the point where the biggest kind of systems on our planet are being dramatically affected. The one that's most obvious to us all on the planet is simply that warm air holds more water vapor than cold. That's just basic physics. What that means is that in arid areas, we're getting much more evaporation, and when it gets hot, we then get fire, like those remarkable fires burning in the boreal forests of Canada this summer and coloring our air. But once that water vapor is up in the atmosphere, it only, on average, a molecule of water vapor only stays up in the air about 7 days. It comes down in deluge, in downpour, and it's easy to track the dramatic increase in severe rainfall events. In fact, the people who I find are absolutely convinced all the time and have for years about our changing climate, it's the people who run public works departments in places like New England. They've been taking out 12-inch culverts and putting in 16-inch culverts for the last decade because the book just doesn't work anymore. There's just more rain than there's ever been. So we're at a very tough place. That's why it would be very useful to move quickly to put up as much of this clean energy as we possibly can.
Understood. We're up against the break here, ladies and gentlemen, and you're still out there in our minds to call in here with your concerns, questions, and comments. 1-800-848-9222 as we wrap up, sadly, hour number 1 and move on to hour number 2, where we will discuss the latest in space news with our good friend, author Rod Pyle. This is interesting, ladies and gentlemen, but remember, as we say this, from the world of weather, all weather, ladies and gentlemen, comes from the nearest star, which is our sun, and all the dynamics of that is a very interesting subject as the Earth changes, it spins, temperature differences, various layers of, carbon dioxide and other weather systems create a world that's most fascinating. We'll be right back, and we'll be rejoined by our special guest here on the Dr. Sky Experience.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtual Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your Virtual Pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
Today's top story: the flavor merger of the century between the Peanut Butter Group and Chocolatey Corp. Joining me is a PBC executive.
Thanks for having me, Barry.
Now, how did you know the merger and the byproduct of it, Jif peanut butter and chocolate flavored spread, would be a success?
It was a gut feeling, a rumbling, if you will. Besides, they're two titans of taste.
Very true. Goes great with pretzels.
And pancakes.
Apples too, I bet. Try Jif PBC today.
I was deep in it, gaming on Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. Unfolding the screen made it twice as big and so immersive, I kinda lost myself. Might have trolled a little too close to the sun. Someone in the chat told me to touch grass, so I took my Z Fold 7 outside and kept playing. Still won, got a tan, and a nice little reset. Powerful processor, realistic graphics, you stay locked in, streak stays alive. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
The use of solar energy is not opened up because the oil industry does not own the sun. A quote from Ralph Nader a long time ago. As we move on to the top of the hour, at conclusion of hour one, we're 47 minutes into this hour. Joining us as special guest, Bill McKibben, author of a brand new book that comes out, and I should say has already come out, Here Comes the Sun. And speaking with us from California, talk show host Richard Dugan of Tell Me Your Story. Mr. McKibben, let's talk a little bit more about this. In your opinion, I know you've been very much involved as an activist in the environmental world. And Richard, I don't know your philosophies on this, but let's ask this question to Mr. McKibben. How do we come together in the political, arena today? I mean, there seems to be so much discourse. I don't like the word discourse, but that is what I see, I think I find, going on here. What's a solution to everybody trying to get along here, which almost seems impossible in many ways?
I think this solar stuff is one big answer to that question. The polling data shows that conservatives and liberals both really like solar power, though I think sometimes for slightly different reasons. I think sometimes conservatives have a very strong sense that my home is my castle. Mm-hmm. And, if your castle has its own power supply, doesn't depend on a utility, then it's a lot more like your own castle. Whereas, liberals are like, let's network the groovy power of the sun to, get our energy needs met. We can work across differences like that, especially since, I think everybody really likes the sun. I'll tell you a story. One of the things that got me writing this book was, you'll recall, the eclipse that came across this part of the world last April.
Yeah, we were there in Texas. Beautiful.
Vermont, where I live, we had totality for a very long time. And so people crowded into the state. It was the biggest thing that happened in Vermont in a very long time. And everybody was in a superb mood. I was at the Middlebury College where I teach, and there were 1,500 kids out on the quad, and they all put down their phones, which is, doesn't normally happen.
You're exactly right.
And
that's a good reason.
It really made me realize we have this deep connection to the sun. I mean, people physically get depressed if they don't get enough sunlight. Mm-hmm. Everybody in the world smiles when the sun comes behind the clouds and hits their shoulder blades. And so something about the turning to the sun, which, as I say, already gives us warmth and light and photosynthesis, and now is willing to give us power. There's something about that. I was very taken on Christmas Eve this year when the Parker Solar Probe became the closest object that we've ever sent up to the sun. It was also, as you know, the fastest moving object in human history. And it did a remarkable job of just displaying the dynamism of the sun, all those solar winds and solar flares streaming off the corona, a place of unbelievable power, as you point out.
Well, you're right, Mr. McKibben. I mean, just to corroborate what you're saying here, I know the audience may not be familiar with this. NASA had sent this probe to the sun after the great helioscientist, named, of course, Mr. Parker, the professor. But you're so right. This particular spacecraft, when it got close to the sun within 3 to maybe 4 million miles, you would never expect that to survive. But kudos to the scientists and engineers, they built this incredible, heat shield where the instrumentation on the other side could work. But even more important than this, the gravity pressure of the sun pulled that spacecraft around at over 430,000 miles an hour. It goes to show you, ladies and gentlemen, that, well, this is not a very nice thing to say, but whatever your weight is, multiply it by 27 times if you can ignore the temperatures of the sun. It goes to show you, folks, that the power of the sun, and yet, Mr. McKibben and to Richard Dugan, it's still classified in the astronomical world as a yellow dwarf star. But there you go. So, Richard, let me jump on you quickly. We only got a couple of minutes, and if you'd be brief, of course. What do we need to do to get together to be on both sides? When we say we'll be on both sides of the aisle, or we'll meet in the middle of the aisle, what do we need to do on all these issues without getting overly political here? I mean, sure. Let's about the subject we're talking about here. How do we come together on this subject, which many people are very upset about when they call it climate change? Some say it's a fraud, a hoax. Some say it's not. Give us a little inspiration in about a minute.
Well, the reality is, whether it is normal cyclical patterns of this planet over the millennia, or whether we have, as human beings, accelerated the process, there are things that we can do. And I do need to clarify one other thing. It is not the generation of the electricity. It is the transmission that causes the electric company to want to turn the power off when the winds kick up. So just wanted to clarify that. Okay. And that would presuppose, or not presuppose, it would definitely put in favor of Mr. McKibben's wanting everybody to have solar power, let's say, on their homes, or at least connected. You wouldn't need transmission lines because the power is fed right into your home, and then, of course, fed into your batteries if that's the process. But getting together, you made a very good example there of the two different perspectives, Mr. McKibben, about, the left, they like it because it's really cool and groovy, let's network, and the right likes it because, it's efficient or whatever the means are. And I say, what difference does it make? Hey, great that you like it. Let's really move forward, pump this up, because we've got to, we're here together.
No, I don't want to turn this into a political debate, of course, where the clock rules. But I thank you for your response, and I appreciate you being part of the show. But let me open this up to Mr. McKibben. You've got the floor here as we go to the top of the hour here. Your book is interesting. I find it fascinating. And the thing is, I try to get through as many of the books themselves before we actually go on the air. So, yes, your humble host here does really try to read all this information and not just, play it by ear. But give us some other inspiration here about this. And again, I always talk about this finally, and not to get overly political or any political way, that it's so important that I think we take a look at this. I'm in favor of having solar power, but again, there's a lot of controversy. I would simply love to see more of those panels made in the United States to put Americans to work. And I still don't know, maybe you don't know, what percentage still comes from China. And then obviously the dumb question would be why? How do we turn that manufacturing over to the side of America for American exceptionalism, in my point?
Well, absolutely, and that's why it was such a shame that the Congress this year got rid of those incentives for doing just that. But we're perfectly capable of making all these things here. As I say, this was all invented down the street from WABC at Bell Labs in New Jersey.
You're right.
Funded by Americans dumping dimes in payphones in the 1950s,
you got it.
So it's a great triumph for Americans, and one we shouldn't turn our back on. We do not want to cede the future to the Chinese. That's a very bad idea. But that's what's happening right now, because this is clearly the great technological innovation of this era. And there's no reason to not play a big role in that
innovation. It makes me very sad as an American because this is so big. The scale of this energy transition, we're talking trillions and trillions of dollars that'll be spent around the world over the next decade as people buy solar panels, as they put them up. And there was a big story in today's paper saying that all the countries of Africa are now busily buying Chinese solar panels because that's who's making them. And so we're going to lose influence of all kinds, influence that really is rightly ours because that's where this stuff was invented.
No, you bring up some good points, and I want to thank you, Richard Dugan, for joining us as the clock runs out at the top of the hour. Always good commentary from you, as you and I, of course, know each other for many, many years, introducing you to this particular experience, the Dr. Sky experience. But again, Mr. McKibben, this is interesting to me, and I know you would wholeheartedly agree. I love the concept of having critical thinking and dialogue. And if people disagree with what you're saying or disagree with what I'm saying or anybody in between, this is the kind of thing we need to do. I mean, let's not go to fists. Let's not go to, higher levels of anger and violence. What we need, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, in my opinion, critical thinking on every subject is important. But how do we maintain, how do we learn the processes of critical thinking and dialogue? Because remember before, and not to sound like we're in school, ladies and gentlemen, the 4 types of conversation that we were talking about before, we like dialogue the best. And I think it's so important. Unfortunately, it may sound like I'm whining, but in the world today, would you not agree, Mr. McKibben? It seems like we don't see a lot of emphasis on common sense, critical thinking, and that particular methodology of disagreeing so that we can find solutions. You get the final word.
This is why I write books, so that I can lay out information for people that they don't already know about, and then they can do with it what they will, assimilate it into their own mental frameworks. But we need, and in this case, that information is good news. Good news that we have a brand new option that's now the cheapest possible option. So whether or not you're concerned about climate change, everyone is concerned about how much money they're spending. And you're right, electricity bills are going through the roof.
Absolutely.
Time to pay some attention to all that free energy that comes pouring down out of the sky every day.
Bill McKibben, thank you for joining us. And Richard Dugan, thank you the same. Mr. McKibben, how do people get in touch with you if they'd like to have some more conversation with you? What's the best method?
They can join us at Sunday.Earth. We're doing this big national day of action called Sunday on September 21st, which, as you know, is the fall equinox.
Absolutely.
So Sunday.Earth. That's the way.
So hopefully on that day, the Earth, of course, is in a little bit of balance, at least it is from the astronomical world, and hopefully from the individual world, whatever our beliefs are, politically or otherwise, maybe we'll all come together in a form of balance. Thank you, Mr. Bill McKibben, and thank you, Richard Dugan, for joining us. My pleasure. We continue at hour number 2, ladies and gentlemen, with Rod Pyle, our space author, as we talk about some of the important things that are happening up above as we get back to the normal topics, and many of them that you tell us you like so much, here on the Dr. Sky Experience. We'll be right back as we continue with hour number 2.
Eczema isn't always obvious, but it's real. And so is the relief from Ebglyss. After an initial dosing phase, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin at 16 weeks. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Searching for real relief? Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? Well, with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills. Wait, did I say job title yet? Get started today and see how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
The Jack Welch Management Institute at Strayer University helps you go from, I know the way, to I've arrived with our top 10 ranked online MBA. Gain skills you can learn today and apply tomorrow. Get ready to go from make it happen to made it happen. And keep striving. Visit strayer.edu/Jack Welch MBA to learn more. Strayer University is certified to operate in Virginia by Chev and has many campuses, including at 2121 15th Street North in Arlington, Virginia.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
3 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to hour number 2 of the Dr. Sky Experience. We appreciate you around the nation and around the world as we wish you the best for your evening wherever you are, or as you move more into your morning around the nation and around the world. Great topics, as you tell us, from the emails that you send us. And you can send me an email. I appreciate that. And we will rapidly respond at drsky@wabcradio.com. And while you're at it, you have an opportunity to listen to a plethora of previous shows here on this particular radio archive. And don't forget all the other great hosts that occupy time and space here on 77 WABC. And another route to go there would be redappleaudionetworks.com for great information, ladies and gentlemen. And I also must say, the last Saturday of every month, we do the best of the Dr. Sky Experience. Why? I'm asked, as for at least the last 15 years, being the host and presenter on an interesting dinner boat here in Arizona. And it's called the Dolly Steamboat. So if you're ever out here in Arizona and want to join us, by all means, go to dollysteamboat.com for an adventure in what we call the dark of Arizona's Junior Grand Canyon. We talk, yours truly, with powerful lasers pointing out the wonders of the heavens, and, of course, an amazing experience in gastronomy, the art of fine cuisine, and blending that together with astronomy. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our helmsmen. They navigate this radio signal as a starship. They are Tony and Bill, and we appreciate them navigating this signal, as we say often and proud to say it, around the nation, around the world, and who knows, maybe even out into the cosmos, to be positive. In hour number 2, ladies and gentlemen, no stranger to this microphone, we reintroduce Rod Pyle. He's an American author, journalist, public speaker, and former television producer and educator who concentrates on subjects regarding spaceflight. Pyle is editor-in-chief of Ad Astra magazine, a print and digitally quarterly published by the National Space Society, and he is the author of many great books. Good morning, Rod, or good evening to you in California. How are you this morning or this evening?
Good morning, Dr. Sky. I'm very good and glad to be back.
Well, good to have you. I guess my fault. I didn't tell properly the information to our illustrious, friends back in the control room, as we call it, the navigators. So there you go. So anyway, let's begin. Of course, both of us have so much to talk about, but more important than that, what could be more important? Ladies and gentlemen, your participation in this radio show. So here's an opportunity to listen to and to ask questions of somebody who knows a heck of a lot about the space world, and we'll also incorporate, as we always do, Rod, a little bit of a sky report that many people say, hey, where's the sky report? I want to see what I can see. So let's begin with you. Let take us out into the stars itself, above the Earth here, in Earth orbit or such, and talk about some of the important subjects that you have to bring to us today in the news world.
Well, we have, we hope, a launch test number 10 of SpaceX's Starship tomorrow. and fingers are crossed that it'll work this time. They've achieved something on each test flight, but for most of them, something also went wrong. So for this one, and this is, of course, the enormous rocket that launches out of Boca Chica. This is Elon Musk's big dream. And this is also the rocket where normally the booster is caught by the arms on the launch pad called Mechazilla. They won't do that this time because they're trying some kind of risky maneuvers with that first stage coming back to see if they can slow it down with less fuel. So they're just going to dump it in the ocean.
Wow.
And then they have a bunch of other tests. And, there's a lot of detail. But I think some of the most interesting stuff is they've changed some. They put all the heat shielding tiles across the bottom of it, which is, of course, what keeps it from heating up and melting when it re-enters. This is the top stage. And they removed selectively a bunch of them to make sure that the thing could survive with, say, it was launching a crew and returning, make sure it could survive with some of the tiles missing. So I think that was very intelligent. And they also have one more very interesting thing. One of the tile areas is what they call active cooling. They're actually running something through there. I'm not sure if it's liquid or gas on this one, to actively cool that tile like a radiator on a car.
Oh, cool.
So if that works for the hottest areas, do that in the future. But the rest of them are just like the space shuttle tiles. They're passive, and they collect and radiate heat back and keep it from melting. So fingers crossed. And another news on that front, they've made great progress on building what they're calling a Starship Gigafactory down in Texas, which is going to be able to build these things. And
Tell us.
And they already... Well, they've been working for years in this big tent structure, and they also have a rigid one, but building these things, by the tens. They're not just doing them one at a time like you would a Saturn V or a shuttle. They build them in clusters. This will allow them to ramp up to, they hope, a couple hundred a year, and they're doing similar things out at Kennedy Space Center, although at this point, I think that's really more of a preparatory building, but they're building their launch pad there.
Right.
So, they're moving ahead. Those of us sitting on the sidelines who are comfortable armchair critics feel like it's going a little slower than we'd like because we are in this foot race with China back to the moon, we think. But if all works well, this is also the spaceship that would land the first American astronauts on the moon in 2 years.
Wow, this is interesting. Rod Pyle, of course, the author of so many space books. You can talk with him about your concerns, anything, of course, that we talk about here. We love dialogue, 1-800-848-9222. And let me collaborate a little bit more about what you're saying here. I'm looking at my desk here, and I have a model of the Saturn V. Wow, the moon rocket. 7.5 million pounds of thrust, as you know. But describe this in better detail. This rocket with 33 Raptor engines punches out, about 16 million pounds of thrust? This is what? Do the simple math. This is incredible. It's more than twice the effective power to lift than the Saturn V. I'm amazed. Talk about that.
So it's interesting. It's twice the horsepower, to paraphrase, leaving the ground, but not quite twice the lifting capacity because, of course, we want to be able to reuse it, so it's got to save some fuel to come back. But it does have a tremendous heavy lift capability. And the only downside of this system, and it's, for better or worse, and there's a little bit of both, it's kind of designed as a one-size-fits-all space launcher. Once it reaches orbit, the one that's bound for the moon, it can take somewhere where they're not sure how many yet, between 16 and 24 refueling flights to get it tanked up to continue onto the moon. Amazing. So that's the big bugaboo that we see. The kind of coordination and choreography you'd have to have on the ground to launch fast enough to keep topping off this big thing filled with cryogenic fuel that's boiling off is going to have to be something nearly miraculous.
Very interesting. And let's talk about the Elon experience even more into what I consider to be the Mars mission. Apparently, and I'm reading this. And I'd love you to talk about this. We're talking about him looking at utilizing his own creative robots, the AI generation robots, to be the first explorers to Mars before, if I have it right, humans traveling even on a one-way mission. Those robots must be really advanced. Tell us about that.
Well, and if he stays on the schedule which he has put out, which he rarely does, we would actually have the Optimus robot or robots. It isn't clear whether he's sending 1 or 2 or 3 on this first flight to Mars. He says by late 2026, which is the next window that opens up, because as you know better than I, being an astronomer, we're only able to launch to Mars every 2 years.
Right.
I don't see it. There's just too many hurdles left for Starship to overcome to make that feasible. And I don't know that the full range of capability that Optimus has really been shown yet. I'm sure they're testing it. I haven't personally seen it.
Right.
But, if you're going to send something up to Mars, a bipedal robot, as good as they're getting now, and you've seen the same videos I have. I saw one the other day from Boston Dynamics of one of their walking robots running and jumping over the wreckage of a house over all this rough terrain and
It's so, Terminator-like. It's almost looking like the Terminator in the movie. It's incredible without the ugly face of the Terminator robots. Right. That's amazing.
And no guns. Yeah. But the cool thing is, our rovers up on Mars, NASA's rovers, do really great work. But any competent geologist will tell you that they could do in about an hour what it takes that thing months to do. So presumably Optimus, being bipedal with two arms and, being able to roughly duplicate human movement, would be able to fall somewhere in the middle there. So some great things could happen. But this is all a big experiment, and I suspect we're probably looking at 2028 at the earliest.
Very interesting. 1-800-848-9222. If you've had concerns, questions, or opinions about what's happening out there, this is the time, ladies and gentlemen, to jump in on the hotline in the form of dialogue, talking with Rod Pyle, an author who's written, how many books now do you have out there right now, Rod? This is amazing.
I'm working on number 21.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. And what will be? Can you give us a little bit of a prelude information on that? A little bit of tidbit on what that book is about.
It's a history of the Apollo program. I've done a couple of those already, but this one is being told through the eyes of one of the flight directors, about whom nobody ever wrote a biography. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a slightly different take, and I'll be able to talk more about it in a couple of months because authors. I mean, we're always turning in the manuscripts late, so I'm still working on it.
Well, when I come and write my first book, I'm going to knock on your door, and hopefully the door will open, because that would be an experience of a lifetime. And I certainly have some ideas that we could talk about off air if you're so inclined to permit me to do that. That would be nice.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Let's talk a little bit more.
I, too, can tell you how to go from a six-figure income to a five-figure income as an author in no time flat.
Wow. That's a positive way to start and continue a radio show. But, Rod, this is interesting. Let's talk a little bit more on the political side of the world when it comes to space. This is amazing, and you gave us a lot of information in the different iterations that we've had you as a guest with what the president has decided on nullifying a nominee, and that was Jared Isaacson, to be the head of NASA for whatever reason. You could tell us what you think the reason was, and what's actually going on in the realm or the area of the administrator or future administrator of NASA right now. Talk about it.
Well, and these are my opinions only, not those of the National Space Society or the magazine. This is just Rod talking. So this is Sean Duffy, who's the interim administrator. As far as any of us can tell, word on the circuit is that Jared Isaacman was ejected because Elon Musk had fallen out of favor, and that there was one guy in particular, his name escapes me at the moment, that had Trump's ear and said, this guy can't be any good if he's a friend of Elon Musk's. So for whatever reason, and, he was about to be going to his final confirmation. So this was like days before that. And I think I told you last time I was sitting talking to see some of these old Apollo guys, astronauts and so forth, when I got a ping on my phone from one of my writers saying, "Hey, did you hear that Isaacman's out?" And I was like, "What?" And I told them, and all of them put their head in their hands and just shook their heads. And the sentiment was, they felt like something beautiful that they had created half a century ago was slowly being unraveled. Mm-hmm. So we don't really know, the party line on it was, well, he contributed to Democrats, but that's something they had known. He had told them almost a year earlier. So that's probably not it. We'll probably never know. So right now we have Sean Duffy in there, who's also in charge of the Department of Transportation, which has its own issues. That's enough job for one guy, but he's now doing two jobs, which is also running NASA. And as we know, the White House has said they want to cut the NASA budget, primarily cutting science by 50%. So that was enough of a shock to the system. But then recently, Duffy came out and said, oh, by the way, we're going to stop looking back at Earth. NASA should just be looking out in space. So to put him in his words, all the climate science and the other priorities the last administration had at NASA were going to move aside. Now, there's a complication here. Although it's not spelled out in these exact words, the NASA charter from 1958 says atmospheric science, which implies Earth, climate change, all that. And, there's a sense that if we don't get the data, then climate change ceases to exist, which we know isn't the case. So it's a little puzzling, a little concerning. If they were going to move that money over to NOAA or some other agency, I could understand it, but this is just a cut with no reallocation. So it's deeply concerning to a lot of people. So a number of missions are on the chopping block, including the Orbiting Carbon Observatory, Deep Space Climate Observatory, another one that looks at plankton and aerosols as they interact with the ocean, which we know is heating and could cause all kinds of drama on its own.
Well, let me propose a question to the audience, Rod Pyle. This is interesting. I want to ask the audience out there far and wide around the nation and the world, how important is the U.S. space program to you, ladies and gentlemen? And maybe we'll get some shocking responses back, but we may also get some very positive ones, because look at the great history. I still have friends. I don't know about you, and I call them sometimes less than friends, but I still respect them. They say, we never went to the moon, and that story goes on and on. But, ladies and gentlemen, your contribution to this radio show at 1-800-848-9222, we posed that particular question. How important is America in space and the whole space program itself, whether it be privatized like Elon Musk or focusing on NASA? Look at all the great strides, Rod, that NASA has made over the years, and it's very obvious, even to a sixth grader, that it seems like we've lost a lot of steam in that engine, regardless, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And there are other concerns. As I think we discussed before, the ROI from NASA activity is huge. It's estimated for Apollo we got between $16 and $24 back on every dollar that went into that program. And that program was a lot more expensive than the one we're doing this time. This is about a quarter or less than what was spent on that. But also, when we won the space race back in the 1960s, there was this huge geopolitical soft power swing of non-aligned countries saying, hey, the U.S. is where it's at. They've got education. They've got engineering technology. See you later, Russia. And off to us they came. And the concern is that, since in the first Trump administration, the gauntlet was thrown down, we're going to get back to the moon first, with, obviously aimed at China, because Russia's out of the game at this point, pretty much.
Yes.
That we have a new geopolitical swing to be concerned about, and it's happening.
Yes. Amazing. It's just an amazing story out there. But talk to us about this. This is fascinating to me. You have, of course, you are the editor-in-chief of Ad Astra. That means To the Stars, as people may not know or may know. National Space Society. Talk about this, because if I'm correct, a good friend of ours, and mine particularly, was Mr. Hugh Downs, the great broadcaster of renown of television and, of course, of so much of radio and TV. But describe the organization to us and how long it's been around. I think it's an important part of American space history.
So the National Space Society was founded back in about 82, I think. There was a merger between two existing organizations, the National Space Institute and the L5 Society. National Space Institute had been founded by Wernher von Braun and some other folks out of NASA as kind of a NASA support group, and the L5 Society was looking at the work of people that were interested in doing orbital colonies. So these two organizations merged. The NSI picked up a chapter structure from the L5 Society, excuse me, and they've been moving on ever since. And they've been publishing Ad Astra since, I think, the late 80s. It's been through a number of iterations. I came in 2017. Yes. And really, it's the largest pro-space group for the normal citizen. Anybody can join it. We have plenty of people in from NASA and other from major space companies and concerns. But really, it's made for everyone. And that's why I joined back in the 80s, because I thought, back then I couldn't get a job at NASA. They didn't need me. But I could join this organization and feel like it was a part of this great adventure that I was hoping would come back any day now, and now it's here.
Well said. The phone lines are lighting up, Rod Pyle, just like kicking the tires, lighting the fires, as they say in the Air Force and the military world of aviation. Let's say good morning to Brian in Bayside. You're on with author Rod Pyle. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, guys. My thing is, I would love to travel in space, but unless we're going to travel a lot faster than we know how to now, where are we going? I mean, great, we can get to Mars, we can, get to neighboring planets, the moon, but where do we go from here?
Very good question. Stay with us, Brian, because Rod, I'm sure, has a plethora of information on that good concern and question.
Well, I certainly have
travel faster.
Yeah, so I think for foreseeable future, you're right. We're talking about the Earth orbit, we're talking about the moon, we're talking about Mars, and there's a lot of work to do there. And more importantly, in the current new space age, especially the United States, there's a lot of money to be made out there. So between stuff we can do on the moon, asteroid prospecting, all this kind of stuff, a lot of it is still somewhat theoretical. But these major accounting firms have predicted that by 2030, we'll be looking at, a $1 trillion economy out there. So there is a business to it. There's also things that you can do in orbit, like power generation, space solar power platforms that beam power down to the surface of the planet 24 hours a day. Once they're amortized out, it's virtually free. Now, I'm sure somebody will find a way to charge money for it because that's how capitalism works. But they don't pollute at all. There is absolutely no carbon footprint. So that alone. And then on my podcast called This Week in Space, we just did an interview with a woman who works at NASA Ames on the space station. And we were talking about being able to grow artificial retinas in zero G in the space station or future space station.
That's powerful.
Artificial heart tissue. And they're moving fast on potential cancer cures, therapies for Alzheimer's, and these are things that are going to bankrupt this country if we're not going to be able to get our heads wrapped around it in the next decade or two because of the increasing cost of entitlement. So, when you start looking at it from that angle, there's a lot of benefits that come back. As far as you and me and the rest of us traveling out there, that's going to take a while, but eventually that'll happen. It may be tourism. It may be retirement on Mars. I don't know.
Well, that's
but
a good one, Rod.
There are reasons to go to either of these places.
Yeah, let me jump in here. Brian in Bayside. Here's an article from World Nuclear News. This came out earlier in February of this year. The headline is Mars in 30 Days, Russia Unveils Prototype of Plasma Rocket Engine. And it goes on, and I'm reading this. It describes a plasma rocket motor as a type of electric motor based on two electrodes. Charged particles are passed between them, and blah, blah, blah. At the same time, a high voltage is applied, and this, of course, creates a magnetic field. Brian, that could be another answer that Rod is adding to the conversation. Wouldn't that be amazing, Brian in Bayside? How about that?
And we know that former astronaut Franklin Chang Diaz has been working on his plasma engine for decades, and they're making slow progress. And then there's also nuclear propulsion, which isn't that fast. But, we know it works. We tested this technology in the 60s on the ground. We know it works. It's just a question of having the political willpower to launch it. And then you're getting to Mars in a couple of months.
No, you're 100% right. People look up the NERVA project. I think it's NERVA, if I'm correct, Rod, that apparently even President Kennedy, when he was alive, obviously in his last year or two, he, of course, went out to the area which we call somewhere like an Area 51, and they demonstrated a prototype of a nuclear rocket, which was simply something that we took for granted, because if we could give little kids in their cereals these little things that were like radioactive toys, why couldn't we build, on a safe side, a nuclear rocket, which is interesting. Folks, 1-800-848-9222. Joining us in the conversation is Rod Beil. He's the author of many books. Plus 20 is the number he's telling us. A very interesting gentleman. I call him a friend, and we certainly appreciate his time here. Rod, we go to the hard break in about 5 minutes, but I wanted to bring up and kind of tease this particular story. China and its involvement of going to the moon. This is a very interesting thing that I thought was quite fascinating. That apparently I don't see the energy like a space race to the days of President Kennedy's goal, but obviously we're still in the road of seeing China possibly, and save all the good information after we come back, but This is kind of interesting. What's going on?
Well, they're really following in the footsteps of Apollo. It's very much a land and grab mission. Get there, land on the surface, grab some samples, and then leave within 6 hours. So this first one that they're talking about for 2030, I think it's going to be earlier, will be a fast get there, prove you can do it, and come home. Nothing compared to what we've got planned, but they're moving fast They move steadily. They have budgets allocated out for a decade at a time. And they're going to do it. It's just a question of whether we're able to get our act together as we claim for a landing of Americans in 2027, or if it continues to slip. And at this point, it looks like we may very well lose this race this time.
Look, I don't want to knock NASA, but it's just like I'm a human just like everybody else, and they have an opinion. And because you're behind a microphone, it's heard by a lot of people. But here we go. What a shame to be able to have a disjointed NASA program, and not necessarily to be this warrior of space that we always have to be the lead, which I think we could, based on all the things we've done in the past. And it's kind of sad, Rod Pyle, that, you know, all these disjointed programs. You had a Constellation program to the moon. Different presidents said, we'll go to Mars. And even President Nixon was looking to see us go there during that period where they could have changed. Instead of doing shuttle, they could have done a Mars mission, right? So it's unfortunate that NASA doesn't seem to have that focal point anymore. And look at all these other countries that are doing it.
The problem is it isn't NASA, it's the government. It's switching administrations. One comes in, cancels what the last one wanted to do. And the funding is so inconsistent, and Congress is, except for this time around, where Congress may give them more than Trump is asking for, more often Congress has given them less than the president had asked for. So, you know, our political system, as wonderful as it is, this moon program is a victim of the way we make these decisions and carry out funding.
No, let me be clear here. Again, you're right. It's not NASA that's doing the disjointed. It's obviously if you can't do things unless you have money, and you could dream all you want and sit under a tree and let an apple hit you on the head, like the allegory of Newton when he talked about gravity, right? In a comical way. But the truth of the matter is, there has to be a passion, and you got to give credit to President Kennedy back then, at that speech at Rice University, when we all know what he said. And he said in summation, we're going to do this before the decade is out, and land a man on the moon and return him safely to the earth. And that particular thing happened. Rod Pyle, you're awesome, and we'll continue on the other side of this break, which comes up in a moment. And we'll actually have Brian back, because we never had Brian have a response or get a response or give him an opportunity to respond. So, Brian, if you're out there in cyberspace, hang on, because we'll have you back as soon as we return here. Where are we, ladies and gentlemen, on the Dr. Sky Experience? Our special guest is author Rod Pyle of 20-something books, talking with you about space at 1-800-848-9222. No question is too difficult for our special guest. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, and the carbon in our apple pies were made from collapsing stars. We are simply made of star stuff. A great quote as we move through hour number 2 from the great Carl Sagan. 33 minutes after the hour, Rod Pyle joins us on a regular basis, ladies and gentlemen. Privilege and honor to call him a friend of the show. And, of course, we lost Brian there in Bayside, so if you want to call back. But, ladies and gentlemen, if you're out there and wondered about the mysteries of the universe, this show, the Dr. Sky Experience, talks about the many mysteries that are out there in the great void. 1-800-848-9222. Rod Pyle with your okay as host here. I'd like to go ahead and do a little sky report for everybody as to what they can see. People tell me in the emails, when are you going to give the sky report? So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We're now experiencing the dark of the moon. That is the new moon of this particular month, and it officially occurs at 5:06 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Check your time zones across the nation. What is it? It's the dark time of the night when you can see, if you're out in the areas where there's no lights or little or lack of light, some of the best things in the nighttime sky to see. And Rod Pyle, coming across the wire right now, is an interesting story about this interstellar comet, I should say, known as C-2025N1. What the heck is this? It's the third so-called interstellar comet, meaning it didn't come from an orbit around the sun. It came probably from another star system, discovered back in July of this year at the Atlas Observatory in Chile, some of the clearest skies. It's now 242 million miles away in the constellation of Libra the Balances, and it'll be closest to the Earth, very safe distance of 170 million miles on October the 29th. But many people, ladies and gentlemen, because of its hyperbolic orbit, are saying it's faster than any object that's zooming through the solar system. And one very dedicated and intellect Harvard astronomer even says that it could be, in his words, an interstellar craft. The rest of the Sky Report goes like this. If you get up early in the morning, and many of you are experiencing that in just a few hours, if you look into the northeast sky just before sunrise, you'll get to see the two planets, easy to see with the naked eye, both Venus and Jupiter. And the end of this particular meteor season, called the Perseids, the dark of the moon, ladies and gentlemen, is a great time to see the beauty of the nighttime sky. Rod Pyle, how'd I do?
You did great, and I have a quick correction to make, if I could.
Go ahead.
Which is, I was saying the two organizations that formed the National Space Society, the L5 Society, of course, was started around the work of Gerard K. O'Neill. If I didn't put that in there, I'd get hate mail tomorrow. I had a little electronic hiccup here, and I was busy, so I missed it. But Gerard K. O'Neill, ladies and gentlemen, our guy, yeah.
And 1-800-848-9222 as we continue to move through the dark of the night into the early morning hours for many of you, and still late evening on the West Coast. Rod, talk more about this, because this particular spacecraft that the Chinese are attempting to utilize, I guess, has been manufactured. Do I describe it as the Lanyu? Or is that correct pronunciation? I'm not fluent in Mandarin.
So the capsule, which is like a slightly larger Apollo capsule, is called Mengzhou, which translates as dream vessel. And it carries more than the Apollo was capable of. It can carry up to 7, like the Crew Dragon out of SpaceX, but it's going to carry fewer than that to the moon. The lander, which is called Lanyue, which translates as embracing the moon, is similar to the lunar module, but as you and I talked earlier, it's a slightly different configuration. So the main difference in this program is their booster, called the Long March 10, isn't nearly the size or heft of the Saturn V, so they've got to launch it twice, once to put the lander in lunar orbit, and then once to send a crew up. Then they rendezvous, and the Apollo program considered this. They felt it was too risky back then. It's not too risky. It'll probably work. Rendezvous in lunar orbit, then the taikonauts that are going to go down to the lunar surface, which is the name of a Chinese astronaut, transfer over to their lunar lander, and it heads down. And as you pointed out, they've got a landing stage which goes about halfway down, and then they jettison that and land on the final configuration with the landing legs down. And then when they're done with what's said to be a 6-hour lunar exploration for this first mission, the whole thing comes up. It's not like the lunar module where it lifts off in the lower stage. Wow. Why they designed it that way, I don't know. But, you know, the thing about this is, and no sour grapes intended here, but anybody, whether it's private industry like SpaceX and Blue Origin or the Chinese, the heavy lifting was really done by the United States and the Soviet Union back in the 60s. That was all the first time for all this stuff. Now we know pretty well how it works. We've got those designs. We have a good idea of how these high-pressure turbines work and so forth. And so although they're operating with sometimes different fuels and different configurations, you know, the legacy of what particularly NASA achieved in that era just can't be overstated.
No, it's amazing what you're talking about. So again, let's go back in time, ladies and gentlemen. The Apollo days. When Apollo 11 went to the surface of the moon, think about that, folks. This is amazing. It just had the lunar module, the descent module, right, Rod, going down on its own power, its own navigation. And we had Don Iles here. I don't know if you heard the interview. It can be, found, everybody, in the individual archives for the Dr. Sky Experience here at WABCRadio.com. Who was Rod, who is this gentleman that we're talking about here, Don Iles? He describes himself as a hippie of the 60s, working at MIT, developing a landing software for this particular spacecraft. And that, to me, is amazing. He flew simulations with the actual astronauts that went there. So look at this. The Chinese are using this big lower booster to get it down, and then they boost, they get rid of that, and then they land. So the point I'm trying to make in simple words, how amazing the whole Apollo landing thing was done a long time ago. Incredible.
It really is, and that whole program. So speaking just of that computer, at the time they started working on that at MIT in the early 1960s, computers filled rooms. They were huge. They were heavy. They were energy hungry. And now we have to have something brought down the size of a briefcase with that technology to get us to the moon. I mean, transistors were still new. You and I had what were probably then very expensive transistor radios. That was a big deal. So here's this computer that's got about the computing strength of the electronic module on your toaster oven at home. I mean, it's just the further I get from it, and I was talking to some of these Apollo guys about that, and we agreed, the further we get from it, the more amazing it is that it worked, and they didn't lose anybody, because this is really rapidly evolved 1950s aerospace technology put into the 60s, and they carried it off without a hitch. They had a couple of near misses, but other than Apollo 1, it all went very well.
Well, let's welcome Paulie in Westwood to our family, the Dr. Sky Experience. Good morning, Paulie. You're on with Rod Pyle. How are you this morning?
Good, Dr. Sky. How are you? I'd like to know something. I heard that the moon is actually moving farther away from the Earth, like an inch a year, and do they have to calculate that in if they go to the moon?
It slowly is. I don't know if it's inches or centimeters, but either way, you're 100% right, Paulie, and that's an amazing thing. Over time, and this is, we're talking a mega amount of time, that would probably be a really big consideration. But, Rod, what do you say on that? I mean, it's an interesting concept that if you're moving the moon away, we have to change our calculations like you had some sort of a GPS system to lock onto the moon.
Well, the guys that work at these places, most of my time was spent at JPL, a little bit at Johnson Space Center. They're frighteningly smart. And if you're able to send a spacecraft out to rendezvous with Pluto at the end of a decade-long cruise mode within a matter of a few miles or less, I think the moon's probably a pretty easy target, because you can see where you're going, right? Exactly. I'm just kidding there, but
no, I get it.
That's all calculated in, of course.
Right. No, it's amazing. Paulie, does that answer your concern in any way, shape, or form? I hope it does.
Yeah, I was wondering, because something popped up on my phone that the moon was moving, and I was just wondering if it was true.
It is. It's slowly receding from us, and that's great because, Paulie, I got to give you credit. A lot of people have no idea about that, or they would think like many people I know that think we never went to the moon. Paulie in Westwood, appreciate your time on the Dr. Sky Experience. We appreciate you greatly. Let's say good morning to Tony in Clifton. Good morning, Tony. How are you this morning? Good to have you on board.
Hi, Dr. Sky. Hi, Rod. I know you guys are busy, so I'll make it quick. I'm very concerned about the NASA program. I would say for all the listeners who are interested to please call the White House number. The president does review those requests, and let him know at the White House through that number that you are very interested in seeing the program continue. Number two, I just wanted to say that there are just a few of the Apollo astronauts alive, and I had mentioned this to Dr. Sky before, Harrison Schmitt, and they're all in their 90s. Harrison Schmitt, of course, I'm not sure if any of them are still active. I think Harrison was seen somewhere at some event in 24. I saw him online. I know he was actually at the White House in President Trump's first term when they put the lunar rock there. And so I'd like to know, Dr. Sky, if he is still available, if the legacy of his is amazing, if he's interested in chatting with you.
Well, it's a long story, and you know what I'm going to ask Tony? We're coming up on the break here in a moment. Would you be kind enough to stay with us after we return to from this break? And Rod and I will go into a longer dissertation on this, because the short story, Tony, is we were at an eclipse event in Albuquerque. I was asked to be a speaker at that event, and here comes Harrison Schmitt, still very much alive and active. And he also sneaks in, I use the word carefully, to Arizona State University, where they have the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, mission. They have a mission control. And he'll sometimes walk in there in a Hawaiian shirt, unannounced. He's not a very big ego guy. He was a United States Senator, as we know. But what he'll do is just walk in, and he'll just blend in with the young people there and other people. But more on this. Tony, stay with us, because I have some questions to ask you, and Rod, of course, wants to jump in on this. More on the Dr. Sky Experience, ladies and gentlemen, with great callers and great guests. And you could guarantee, ladies and gentlemen, this is the kind of show that we want to give you. We'll be right back.
A massage chair might seem a bit extravagant, especially these days. 8 different settings, adjustable intensity, plus it's heated, and it just feels so good. Yes, a massage chair might seem a bit extravagant, But when it can come with a car, suddenly it seems quite practical. The all-new 2025 Volkswagen Tiguan, packed with premium features like available massaging front seats, it only feels extravagant.
Got some good news for your ears. More of that good stuff is coming up. And even better news for your hair. The best hair care is at Sephora. They've got all kinds of products for every kind of hair. From brands like Amika, Kerastase, Day, and K18. You knew where to get great audio. Now, you know where to get great hair care, too. Sephora. Good news for great hair. Shop hair care now at Sephora.com.
This school year, let the Walmart app ace your kid's favorite subject, snack time. With Nature Valley Crunchy Granola and Danimals smoothies they'll actually wake up for. Craft Lunchables for a truly refined cafeteria palate, or Gatorade for when they take Capture the Flag a bit too seriously. Get all their on-the-go cravings delivered right to your door, just in time for that opening bell. New school year, all the snacks. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Love espresso, drip coffee, and cold brew? With the Ninja Luxe Cafe, if you can crave it, you can brew it. Espresso, balanced. Drip coffee, rich. Cold brew in a flash. With Barista Assist technology, you brew with no stress and no guesswork and make perfect silky microfoam hands-free from dairy or plant-based milks. Shop the Ninja Luxe Cafe at ninjakitchen.com.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Science is not only compatible with spirituality, it's a profound source of spirituality. Another great quote from Carl Sagan as we move to the top of hour number 2. And continuing with our show, ladies and gentlemen, we're rejoined by Tony and Clifton and our guest Rod Pyle in a conversation that Tony was responding or asking about for Rod to respond to about an astronaut like Apollo astronaut Harrison Schmitt. Rod, I think that's an awesome question that she's asking about. Please continue.
Yeah, so we still have Fred Hayes from Apollo 13, who's somewhat active, and Charlie Duke from Apollo 16, who's extremely active. He's constantly out there traveling. He was the youngest of the moonwalkers at the time he was on the moon, and he is all over the place. And if you remember anything about the Apollo 16 mission, Charlie was hilarious because he was so enthusiastic. And his voice is way up like this, and hot dog, John, isn't this great? And John Young was, this kind of hickory stick sort of guy. Charlie, calm down. So they're driving the lunar rover across the moon, and it's pretty close quarters in that thing. It was really tiny. So Charlie would be gesturing, John, look at that rock over there. We got to go look at that. It's like, oh, darn it, Charlie, stop hitting my arm. I can't steer. So Charlie's
good old Texas
great guy.
Boy. There you go. That's it.
I did want to reiterate a point that Tony brought up, though, that's really excellent, which is also write your representatives, because they've got a voice, and write Ted Cruz's office, because as of right now in Congress, he's overseeing this stuff, and he needs to know that people think it's a priority. So add that to your list of letters.
Tony, you get the last word. Thanks for staying with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is exciting. I think their legacy is amazing. So what I was asking, though, is do we know of any of them who are still on the circuit at 90, like talking and doing things? Who's the most active, would you say?
Charlie Duke.
Yeah, I met him once. He's awesome. Yeah,
he is incredible. He's also he's an astronaut come lay pastor, interestingly, and also Jerry Griffin, who was one of the flight directors, is also traveling almost weekly. It's amazing. Right now, he's a little busy because he's coordinating the flood recovery efforts in the Texas Hill Country. At the age of 90, they put him in charge because he's that good.
I know.
But
I know.
Generally, he's all over the place, yeah. So there's a
Tony,
handful of them that are still out
we
there.
appreciate you, and you're calling in from Clifton, New Jersey. I used to go along Route 46 to the famous Rutt's Hut. Is it still around? I'm just curious.
It's still there. I don't like participate.
Okay.
I
had to ask because
I'm a hamburger. I'm a hamburger girl.
Well, Tony, I appreciate you on our show. And I always appreciate your, concise and very impacting concerns, questions, and dialogue. So thank you. Hope you have a good weekend. Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Let's say good morning to Pamela in New Jersey. She's been patiently waiting. Good morning, Pamela. You're on with Rod Pyle.
Good morning. And I'm just to give a counterpoint. I'm a capitalist, and I was one of those kids watching the moonwalk and But some of us have grown cynical, concerning funding because, like Atlantic City was going to bring our taxes down in New Jersey. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And, a lot of these moon things, it's going to invent things for science, and I'm sure it has. But and I'm sure we see it in some form somewhere down the line. But as we know, medical things and energy has gone skyrocketed through the roof, and our everyday life is not, I don't know, you could argue it's better, but a lot of us are hurting out here. So for a conservative, for somebody, to say that, I'm seeing the other side. So just, in reference to funding, remember, I was one of those kids in the 60s saying, oh, boy, this is going to make our life easier. And it seems like life is getting harder.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that perspective, but you have every right to have a response from Rod. Rod, that's a very interesting concern that Pamela has. Please address it.
Oh, it is. And in broader terms, it sort of falls into the argument of, fill the potholes on Main Street before you start paving the way to the moon. And I can only say, as I said earlier, the returns we ended up getting from Apollo just fiscally were 16 to 24 over every dollar that was spent. But in terms of education and innovation and so forth, the returns were huge. And I hear you about how life is now. It's a very tough time. But if we let China pull too far ahead of us, we're going to be in a much worse way than we are now. And they are already at about parity with us in orbital activity, and probably going to be with parity with us in lunar activity pretty soon. And, some of that's geopolitical. It's a big, complicated, thorny issue. And I do hear you because it doesn't feel like it's going to help us in the short term. I personally would like to take a small percentage away from the F-35 budget of $1 trillion plus over its deployment lifetime and put that into this tiny NASA budget, which even at its height right now, back in the Apollo era, when we remember those landings, it was almost 5% of the federal budget. Today, all this is going on, including all the outer solar system stuff, the space station, everything else, for 0.5% of the federal budget, soon probably less. So when you look at that compared to defense and everything else, the Space Force budget is half again as big as NASA's, and I don't know what they're doing with it, but I think,
you're right.
I think
you're right,
we can
Rod.
afford.
It's interesting. But Pamela, before we let you go here, and we say that respectfully, this is interesting. I'm with you on many of these things here. We had our previous guest in hour number one, Mr. McKibben, writing a book about solar power. And like myself, I'm a capitalist and proud to say it. And I'm an open-minded person who tries to be common sense. But wouldn't it be great if we could have the manufacturing of these solar panels, bring it back to America, and keep what we consider America first, not with a bad attitude about it? But Pamela, you get the last word on that. Have we at least responded that gives some sort of hope?
No, I agree with that. And there's toxic material in solar panels. And, you think, those of us who have been on this planet a while, we know to ask questions, Vietnam, et cetera. And,
you bet.
Oh, yeah.
So, for the last, how many months, or up to almost a year now, we were terrorized in New Jersey by these drones. And everybody giving us, we don't know what they are. Come on, get real. There's a difference between secrets of state and give us a word why these big, huge robots are hovering above our house. And
boy, Pamela, I like you a lot. You're 100% right. You're like an activist in my corner because, no, you're absolutely right. Still, Rod knows this also. We've never been given an answer to the people in the New York metro area who saw these SUV-sized objects, and I'm being a little bit on the conservative side. We never heard what it was, but when one answer was given to us in the new administration is that, don't worry about it, it's a research project, or we really don't have much more to say. Pamela, that story continues, but more important, I hope we've at least given some positivity to the concerns that you break and bring to the table. So thank you for joining us. I hope you'll be part of this.
I appreciate the ability to state that side. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Rod, we need this done in record time because we're almost out of time, and that's the way it works. The clock rules. How do people get in touch with you? Because we've asked this before of you, and hopefully you're getting some responses, but how do people get in touch with you?
They go to my website, pylebooks.com. That's PYLE-books.com. And I can also be contacted through the National Space Society at NSS.org. And while you're there, maybe you'll want to join.
There you go.
Let them know I sent you.
That's a clarion call for common sense, because if you don't, and again, you're under no obligation, ladies and gentlemen, it should be right from the heart and wanting to do something, because you're right. You illustrated in this 1 hour, as you always do, positively and very, very eloquently, that the NASA budget is an extremely small portion of so many of the other things going on there. And not to knock Sean Duffy, the transportation secretary, say it once again. The mission now is to take away from what kind of science that I think you mentioned? What are they doing?
Well, they want to cut the NASA science budget by just under half if the White House gets its way. But in particular, this recent move was to kill climate science and anything looking back at Earth, which includes, some part of weather forecasting and monitoring other parts of the environment. It's not just for environmentalists. It's for farmers. It's for ships at sea. All this stuff could be affected. So it's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And a little startling revelation as we wrap up our show, Rod, maybe not to comment on, but just to mention to the audience here on Talk Radio 77 WABC, Chinese scientists and others around the world are now finding a correlation between high sunspot numbers and the change of the solar cycle to increases in blood pressure in you and I. Isn't that a most amazing subject at all? That even still, ladies and gentlemen, there really is a correlation between what's going on in the heavens, and of course it manifests itself all the way down to our own bodies. The mysteries of the universe continue. Rod, is that right, Rod Pyle? Amazing.
That's fascinating. I had no idea.
Yes.
Well, good. I have an excuse to tell my doctor as to why my blood pressure is always so high. It's not my fault. It's the sun.
But we have to find out, is it higher during solar max or is it lower? But no, what they're saying is, obviously, they have to do more research, but that's fine. And it's very interesting because it's saying that it's affecting the harmony of the frequency of the Earth, like 7.8 hertz, that these solar storms affect the natural frequency of the Earth, which then could be induced into humans. But again, I'm not a medical doctor here on this particular radio show, and we'll get experts in that field to talk about what that story is. Rod Pyle, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on the Dr. Sky Experience. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for participating. Next week, we're going to go into the aviation mode for a good part of our show with author Bill Yenny, just like a Rod Pyle, but in the aviation world. And in hour number 2 of Friday of next week, that is midnight Eastern Daylight Time to Saturday morning, 2 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we will, of course, be talking with a retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel who has a great aviation story, and also a long-term pilot for both FedEx and other airlines, talking about why and how airplanes crash and the frequency that we're seeing, what needs to be done in the aviation world. And then once again, the last Saturday of every month, that is the midnight to 2 a.m. Sunday portion of the Dr. Sky Experience, you will be hearing the best of the Dr. Sky Experience, because I'm proud to be part for the last decade or more as a speaker and the host of the Dr. Sky event called the Cruise to the Cosmos at DollySteamboat.com. If you're ever out in Arizona, we'll be happy to shake your hands. And thanks to Bill and Tony for being our helmsmen on this individual show as we welcome TJ McCormick as we move into the morning hours here on the other side of midnight. Clear skies, health, and happiness to all.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. You can hear the Dr. Sky Experience Saturday mornings, midnight to 2 a.m. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Buying a gun for someone who is not allowed to? That's a crime. It could cost you up to 15 years in jail and a $250,000 fine. If someone asks you to lie to a federally licensed firearm retailer so you can buy a gun for them, don't do it. Got a tip? Call 1-888-ATF-TIPS. That's 1-888-283-8477. Brought to you by the National Shooting Sports Foundation and the ATF.